So this just arrived in the mail today. This is a 1949 Ward's Airline radio. Now, bought it on eBay. Didn't pay very much for it. It's in really nice shape, but you can see that somebody has modified the cabinet here and added this switch. Well, they actually did a very nice job doing this. I doubt that I would be able to have made an opening that nice myself. It has to go. I'm going to have to put this cabinet back to stock, which means I'm going to have to take that switch out, fill the area, and then prime and paint this cabinet. Now, then the next question is, why is the switch here? It says off and on. Is that because the power switch part of the potentiometer here is bad? I'll have to find out. I'll have to take it apart and see. It might just have needed cleaning with some contact cleaner, and this was the previous owner's solution, probably done back in the 70s or the 80s. But if the potentiometer is actually bad, I will just find a replacement or order a new one, and I will replace it. Now, the seller says that this radio does work, so I will hook it up to my Sencor PR57 here in a moment, and we'll see if it actually does work or not. Okay, so we're hooked up to the PR57 here, and we'll apply power to it. Now, this is just a test. I'm just going to give this a baseline to kind of get an idea of how this is going to work. I do plan on pulling this out and replacing the capacitors and going through checking the resistors, cleaning the tube sockets and doing all that. I just kind of want to know if it's working, how it's working, and what the switch does. So PR57, we're at about 90 volts, so we're on. Let's see here. I'm going to turn the power switch, the regular potentiometer, and see. No, we have nothing. So let's try this. Let's try the switch on the top. Oh, well, we got some life. That was me just turning the volume knob potentiometer back on because I had turned that off. Let's see if we start to get some sound out of the speaker. Now, I am only at about 90 volts, so yeah, we're getting something here.
Smarter than Will Kane show. I got you. Jeff Johnson here. No, what I'm saying is you're very plugged in, so anything you're saying
the
is well
volume
here.
control is dirty, but it actually sounds pretty good for just at 90 volts. I'm not even running at full power. It's got pretty good sensitivity. Now, I don't want to run this too long. I really want to get this out of the cabinet and see what's going on, so I'm going to power this off and we'll catch back up here in a minute. So I started pulling this chassis out, and one of the interesting things about how this radio comes out is you actually have to pull the pointer off in order to get the chassis out on this. It's different than a lot of radios where the dial face and everything slides back. But what I'm going to try, this pointer's pretty sad shape, but I'm going to use some semi-chrome here and see if I can polish this back up. It may be a lost cause, but we'll give it a shot and we'll see what it looks like. So the corner of the back of this radio here was starting to break off. So I found that this type of like Elmer school glue, this stuff works really good for a lot of stuff on vintage radios and TVs. So I put a little bit of it there and I clamped it with a couple of these spring clamps and let it sit for an hour or so, and Now it feels pretty good. I will let it dry overnight before I actually put screws in it to hold it. But that works really good. The other thing that this stuff works good for is if you have a sticker like you'll see on the back of a CRT, or sometimes inside a radio, like this thing on the chassis. That one's really falling apart. But if it's just loose and floating around inside the cabinet and the glue is gone, if you use a little bit of this glue and wipe it off, or wipe it on the back of the sticker, you can stick it back down and it sticks to almost anything really good, and it doesn't bleed through the sticker and make the sticker look distorted or anything. It actually works really good. It's a really good way to get old stickers to stick again inside of radios and TVs. Well, got this chassis out of the cabinet, and you can see I have it hooked up across the power switch. If you look or listen to the meter, you can hear that that's with his switch. Now, I sprayed a bunch of contact cleaner into this switch, and you see here we have a contact for a minute when it comes on, or a second. I mean, it just barely connects. But yeah, I think that switch is shot. So I guess I'm going to have to end up ordering a potentiometer with the switch. So I'll have to get on that here. Now, surprisingly, minus that one modification, everything else looks to be original. And this radio actually sounded really good for being as stock as it is. I mean, just having that one switch, and the control was dirty when the volume, if I clean that minus the switch, it sounded fine. But I'll get that part ordered up, and maybe while we're waiting on that part to come, we can start work on this cabinet. Back onto this radio. I've been trying to find the control for it, and I was going to order some, and it turns out that when I dug through my garage, I have a whole bunch of brand new controls. I bought a vintage TV and radio store, and it has all kinds of stuff. So not only do I have new controls, I have a bunch of vintage, new old stock replacement controls for televisions and radios. But actually none of them were exactly what I needed. So what I did is I pulled the switch out and actually chipped a little bit of the Bakelite off the switch part of the potentiometer and flooded it with contact cleaner. And eventually I got it to the point where it started to work again. And it's working now. So we'll see how it works and it holds up. I might end up replacing this anyways, but you know, it's working right now, so you know, it should be good. I mean, it wasn't making any contact before at all. So I've pulled the speaker grill out. It's held in by these little bent pieces of spring steel, and they go on those little pegs. Those pegs are really hard. You have to take a pick and work at these, and you got to be very careful so you don't break those off. That's a real delicate job to do. Now, I bent back these pieces on this bezel here, and this is just about ready to come off. Taking this off, and I'm going to polish this and see how much of a shine I can get back here, and also set that aside. I'm going to pull off the speaker grill, which is grill cloth. It's still in nice condition. I'm going to iron it and then try to spray glue it and reattach it. You can see it's real wavy, like it's been pushed in. I still have to fix this cabinet as well and fill the hole, and that's something I'm getting ready to start on as well. So I will pick up once I get this piece of trim here polished up. Okay, so on this cabinet where the switch was cut into the top, I flipped it over here and I sanded this area, and I put some JB Weld on here. We're going to flip it over. Well, hopefully, what I did is I put some blue tack up here, and my goal was that I do not want the JB Weld to actually flow over to the top of this, because I want to be able to use body filler up here, like automotive Bondo. I just wanted the JB Weld to get as a cap on the bottom to keep that from falling out. So we'll see. The blue tack is kind of sticking to the JB Weld, so might be a little bit of a challenge to clean it up, but it'll probably work out pretty good. So I'm gonna get started on cleaning that up. All right, so yeah, it just took a little bit of work, but I got all that blue tack out of there. So I'm gonna let this JB Weld set up overnight, and then that's going to be a good strong base for me to lay some automotive body filler over this. I'm going to rough this up, peel the sticker off, and put some filler over this, and then after that I'll primer it and block it out and get ready to paint it. But next thing I'm going to start work on is I'm going to start work on this chassis. I'm going to replace this big multi-section electrolytic with modern electrolytics. I'm going to replace all of these wax capacitors here. So all those are leaky and will need to be replaced. I'm going to check all the resistors to see that if they are at the correct value, if they've increased. Everything actually sounds pretty good. The volume output's a little low on this, but I really don't have any filter hum, but it's probably a good idea to change everything anyways, because if I put it back together, you know, it'll start to hum as soon as I get it done. That's just how things work. And then on to this ring. So I did start polishing this. You can see on the inside it is still corroded. What this appears to be is some sort of plated material that this was actually clear coated, unlike the needle, which was not clear coated. This was clear coated, and it looks like it had kind of almost just like a gold painted finish to it. I have to look online to see what this is supposed to look like. I might have to strip the clear coat off and try to polish the metal up. If that doesn't work, I might end up painting this gold. I have a really pretty decent gold paint that I can use, but we will see. Anyways, well, I'm happy to say I was able to polish that up. It was clear coated, and that took quite a bit of time. I probably spent 45 minutes by hand cleaning the clear coat off of that plating, and I was worried that I would burn through the plating in very visible areas, but luckily I didn't. It looks pretty good. I'm very happy. At least it's not painted. The paint would never look this nice. So next, I will start on that chassis. I just took a detour to work on this. So these are the capacitors that were pulled out, and this is a multi-section electrolytic that we took out. This is a switch. All the capacitors have been changed with new ones, and all the resistors were checked, and actually nothing was out of spec. Where the multi-section electrolytic was, I put in a terminal strip. I'm still waiting on one electrolytic capacitor to go right there, but everything else is done. I do have a capacitor I can put in there temporarily. I might put that in place just so that I can do the alignment, but we will see. So I'm just finishing up the alignment here. This thing was quite a ways out, so that should make a big difference. It seemed to wake up with a little alignment. This thing is really sensitive now. And this is without any external antenna. I'm getting a lot of stations that I don't normally get in here. This is in the middle of my lab and I got stuff surrounding me. Some of these stations are really faint that we're getting in here.
Silent whistleblowers and allowed millions of travelers to leave the country.
The alignment was off, but made a world of difference when I got it in. So I've ironed this speaker grill, and it's just about perfect. It hasn't been glued in place, but it's a lot better than it was. So once I get some spray glue on here, I think it'll look pretty good. It's definitely a mile away from where it was. Then on the cabinet, I sanded the area around the switch with some 600 grit because I'm getting ready to put some body filler on it, and I want to have some mechanical adhesion here on the areas where the filler is going to overlap. I'm hoping to sand all that back anyways, but I would just like to have some adhesion there in case anything does stay in that place. And then after that, I'm going to put a primer surfacer filler over that, and then we'll sand that back and spray the cabinet. Okay, so here is my first coat of auto body filler. This is Bondo, not Bondo brand Bondo, but just another brand. Used a plastic squeegee thing here and just spread it on. I tried to pack it into the openings where that switch was to try to avoid getting air bubbles. I may have air bubbles, I'll find out when I sand it back, but lots of times I'll have to do a second coat or use some spot putty to fill in any of the imperfections. But we'll see once I get it sanded. Alright, so here is the first coat of Bondo sanded back. Started with 120 to take the bulk of it off. Went to 220, and then I finished with some 600 wet to smooth out the scratches. If you look really close, you'll see there are pinholes. There's a little bit right there, there's a little bit right there, and a little bit right there. Now, I'm going to use some of this. This is Bondo glazing spot putty to fill in those imperfections. However, when you're using that, you really only want to use it to fill in imperfections that big. You don't want to get much bigger than that. You can fill in little nicks in the paint, things like that. You don't want to actually fill in very big chips with it because it doesn't stick that well. It's not catalyzed. You'll sand it out real easily. It just, if it's anything big, it's better to mix up a little bit of Bondo, put it in there, and then sand it back. But these few areas will work fine. And plus the primer filler will also help blend that in. So I'll be back once I get the spot putty in. Okay, so here is a spot putty applied using this spatula here. Not the best body man, but I just put it on there. Tried to get enough to hopefully fill in those pinholes. All that's going to be sanded back anyways, so this is just to get coverage over that area. So we'll join back here in a minute once I get a chance to let this dry and sand it. Here is the spot filler sanded back. It's pretty good right now. I'm going to put down a layer of primer filler next, and then we can spray a little bit of a guide coat and kind of see exactly what is left. But the primer filler should take care of anything that's left in the bodywork here. Okay, so the first layer of primer filler is down. And then on top of it, I have guide coat. Guide coat is just simply any type of dark spray paint you have. This is just black spray paint, and it's misted on top of the primer. And that's used for when you wet sand the primer. Any of the low spots will show up as dark as the misted on guide coat will stay in those low spots as you sand. So like little pinholes and stuff will stay black. It's just good for getting all the imperfections out. Now, this is the primer I used. I've chained it at my local auto parts store. I would not recommend this stuff. It goes on like water. It's very thin primer filler. It's hardly a primer filler. You can go to your auto paint supply store, and they do have aerosol primer filler that actually is really nice primer filler you can get in a can. It runs about $17. This stuff was about $7. I wasn't able to get to the paint store to get some of that stuff. They also even make catalyzed aerosol primer filler, which is really good because it's like sprayable Bondo. It's really nice, and the thing about catalyzed is it really locks down everything underneath it. You can't reverse it with acetone. Yeah, that stuff's great. The problem with it is once you set off the catalyst inside the can and you shake it up, you have a pot life in the can, meaning you have minutes to hours to use this entire spray can, because it will cure inside the can completely. With the catalyzed product, it'll be completely done. So you have to use it on a project where you know that it's worthwhile to spend the money on a catalyzed product. So it'd have to be a very nice radio, or you might want to be primering more than one radio or a vehicle or something like that. Anyways, we'll come back after I wet sand this and see if we have to do another layer of primer. So I stopped sanding here. This is just after a couple passes, but what I wanted to show you was the purpose of the guide coat. So you can see the outline here of all this stuff where this switch was cut out. This dark areas is low, and that's what the guide coat is showing. It's showing where the highs and the lows are. Any of this stuff that's dark is still low. So I have to sand until that is gone. And if I break through the primer, I'm going to have to do another layer. But that is why you put down the guide coats. It gives you an outline to show you exactly. And you can also start to see like kind of the lakes of where the other sanding was too. You want to smooth that out as well. Okay, so now I've broke through the primer, but I still have, you can see a teeny pinhole there. There's a teeny pinhole there. So I have to do another layer of this primer filler. This is where a better primer filler would not have broken through this quickly. You would have been able to fill that completely, and you would have been able to do this in one pass. The other thing you want is you really want to let a primer filler, especially if it's in cool weather below like 60 or 70 degrees, after you put your coats on, you want to allow that to dry for probably 24 hours before you sand, because it's a thick paint, and if you sand too soon, it's just going to all come off on you. So you really need to let that sit for about a day before you sand on it. So that's why having this thin paint really slows down my process, because now I got to prime it and wait another day and hope I don't break through on this next time. But we'll see. Hopefully I get this next pass. Here is coat 2 of primer, and we'll see how it looks when it gets sanded back. Alright, this cabinet is just about ready for paint. As you can see, we no longer see any outline of the switch. The top is nice and flat and smooth, and all of the primer is feathered out. Now, the way that I achieve this is I take a foam block like this. This one's a kind of a soft one. I have firmer ones as well. I wrap it with 600 wet and dry sandpaper, and then I spray both the sandpaper and the radio with some water, and in this water bottle I have some Dawn dish soap, just one drop, just to give it a little bit of lubrication when you're sanding. It makes it a little bit easier for sanding. And then you just sand, and you sand until you're until the black's gone, until all your guide coat's gone, until it's smooth. And you want to make sure that you have no rough edges. You want to kind of feather it out like this until it looks nice. Once you have a nice feathered smooth edge, then it's ready to paint. Now, if you really want to go crazy, you could actually put down like a sealer coat on top of this, but we're not really going that crazy. We'll just put paint right on top of this. My biggest concern was going to be making sure that we do not see that switch outline, which would have absolutely shown up right through the paint if we hadn't done this extra work. So, all right, we're getting ready to spray this cabinet. So, before we spray it, we want to use some grease and wax remover, or wax and grease remover. I wouldn't recommend this brand. Once again, this is just what I was able to get quickly at my local auto supply store. If you go to your auto paint supply store, you'll get a much better product that will work much better. But what you want to do is you take a rag, one of these, and you fold it in 4. You put the bottle like this when it's open, you get a bunch in here, and you wipe the radio down. And then you fold it over like this. Now you have a clean side. You'll still have wax and grease that's soaked through. You do it again. And then if you like, you can actually fold it over to the inside. Kind of hard to do with one hand. And then you have 2 more cleaner insides, and you can do a final wipe down. Now, what this does, and the reason this is important, even if you skip all the other steps, a good wax and grease remover will help you from getting fish eyes and reactions in the paint from contaminants that you would get otherwise. This is really helpful with spray paint to make sure that you don't have that happen, because fish eyes will ruin a paint job that you put hours into making happen. So it's always good to use some of this. Now, I would also use a tack cloth when I was done, which would take all the lint particles off. But since I'm going to be spraying outside, I'm just going to skip that step and make sure that I have as much of the lint and dust off. So I've been masking off this decal on the bottom of the radio. And one thing I wanted to mention was this Tamiya masking tape, this 18 millimeter. You can get in different sizes. This stuff is the best masking tape when it comes to making fine lines on like decals and things like that I have found. When you spray paint something, you peel it off, the lines are nice and crisp, and you don't get bleed through. At least I hardly ever do. It's a lot better than any other masking tape I have found. So if you're looking for something that gives you a decent quality line, you can pick this stuff up on Amazon or eBay. It seems a little expensive. This was like $7 or something like that, but this roll goes a lot longer than you think. It actually goes quite a long ways. It's painted, and now it's the point where people are going to think, oh man, I've wasted all my time and that looks like crap. What do? Paint that thing with a brush? Well, no. This is base coat. So it is, it could be used as top coat, but once again, my favorite company that I hate, this is Ford Wimbledon White. You can get an okay gloss out of this paint if you really try, but it's not going to shine very good. If you want a really good single stage paint, what you want to do is, there's some better stuff out there, Rust-Oleums and stuff that give you a better high gloss than single stage paint. But I only was going after an even coat that doesn't have runs. So I put it on in direct sun in the heat. So my gloss isn't that great, but I didn't get runs. It dried fast, and that's what I'm after. Now, what comes up next, this will make all the difference in the world. This is Spray Max 2K Clear. This is catalyzed automotive clear coat in a spray can. So what it is this is a 2-part clear coat. You take this off the lid, you go to the bottom of the spray can. On the bottom of the spray can, there's this little thing. You put this on here and you pound that down that breaks a canister inside of the clear coat, and then you shake it up. At that point, you have a catalyzed clear coat. When you spray this out, this will be just like the clear coat on the paint on your car. This will spray shiny. This will be rock hard. You cannot reverse it with lacquer thinner. So if this radio gets abused by being cleaned with improper cleaning products, somebody spills something on it in the future, or heck, it sits outside for 5 years, the paint will still look nice with this on there. This is designed for automotive finishes. And the other nice thing about this is you can color sand and buff this. Now you can color sand and buff stuff like this, but you're really not going to get a super high gloss out of it. This, you can get an extremely high gloss out of it. These cans run around 15 to 25 bucks, depending on where you get them. Now, I am using this on 2 different radios, so not just one radio, so we can split the cost up between 2 different radios. So, I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm going to allow this base coat to dry overnight, and then we will spray it, and then I'll be able to show you the results. And then finally, it will get color sanded and buffed, which will take any dirt nibs or orange peel out, and this thing will be like glass. Okay, I can't even get near it. This is just how it came out of the can. This is with the clear coat on it. I have to let this dry for a couple of days, and then I can polish it out. I'd like to get you a better shot of it, but this thing is very, very shiny right now. So hopefully in a day or 2, I'll have it ready to be polished, and I will have some better video. Okay, so here's the cabinet the next day. It is still too fresh to color sand, but it looks really nice. Now you can see it does have orange peel to it. The one thing I've noticed about this clear, and maybe it's just how I put it down, is that you can get it to lay really flat and glossy the first day. It seems like as it dries, more orange peel comes out. But it's not a big deal because I painted this outside in a kind of a windy day, so there's some dust nibs and stuff in the paint you can kind of see right there. I have always planned to do a wet sand and buff. I'm just going to lightly sand this. This is a white cabinet. It will look really good, you know, just with a quick 2000 grit sand and buff. But I'm real happy you can't see that switch any longer that was there. So I will update you in a day or so once this cures fully and that I can start polishing it. Okay, so I started wet sanding. So you'll notice that the surface is nice and dull now. What you want to do when you wet sand is you really want a foam block like this. And the reason why you want a foam block is because if you're just sanding with a piece of paper, you'll leave lines where your fingerprints, you'll dig grooves where your fingers rub into the panel. So you put that foam block on a piece of paper and then you fold it over 3 ways. Now that gives you 3 surfaces you can sand. You can flip a piece over 3 different ways and use it to sand. When you're sanding, you want to make sure that you stay about a 1/2 inch away from all edges. Because if you get too close, that's where your paint is the thinnest, and you will just burn right through it, and your paint job will be ruined. You'll have to start over again. And it's good to stop every so often and dry off your work with a towel and kind of get an idea of where you're at. You want a perfectly smooth, flat image. You don't want it to be, you don't want to see dents and divots and dots. You can see a couple right here. That should be sanded out. But if you don't have a ton of clear, you may not want to go that deep. So it's up to you. But also be careful when you're sanding to notice if you're starting to get low on clear. You will notice because the shade will change, or you'll start to get color of the base on your paper and stuff. So it's kind of one of those things that it's kind of dangerous to do. So you have to, you know, take your time and be careful. And it's the next day, and I polished this out. It looks really nice. What I used these polishing pads you get on Amazon. It has a drill attachment for like $8. You get like 8 of these things and an attachment. And then I just used some 3M rubbing compound. On top of that, I used some carnauba wax. Came out really nice. I'm very excited to get this thing back together. It's been a long road, but I really want to see this radio all together and listen to it. Well, the cabinet's looking pretty sharp, but the chassis is not. So I'm going to get to work on cleaning this up, just because it would be an awful shame to put that dirty thing in that beautiful cabinet. So I'll get started on that. Okay, the chassis is all done. I got in this last capacitor and it's all back together. I'm going to get ready to put it back in the radio. Now, I do have 2 100 picofarad mica caps in here, and I know there's kind of a mixed consensus on mica, and some of them can blow up, some of them can't. I do have an order of 100 picofarad micas coming, so I will probably pull this back out when those come in, and I will probably just change those just to be safe. But otherwise, everything else is done, and it's ready to go back in the radio. Okay, the chassis is cleaned up as good as I'm going to clean it. I cleaned all the dust off of it and wiped down all the tubes, and I've actually checked most of them. This 12 SA7, you can see there's quite a lot of burn off inside it. It actually tests just fine. I was thinking about changing it, but you know, it's performing fine. The radio sounds good. I have a bunch of spares, but I'm just going to leave it in for now. And if I have problems down the road, I'll change it out. But otherwise, I think the radio is finally ready to go back together.
Return in sight.
It's all back together.
Attempt to transition from those
and it's working great.
Real
and I think it looks pretty good.
And you can hear the surprising answers. It's all.
But Cuban.
I just want to take this moment to thank everybody for hanging out on the workbench and watching me restore this vintage radio. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing. This is my very first restoration video. I do a lot of this work on my own. I have a lot of vintage TVs and radios which I restore as a hobby by myself. But I'm thinking about recording that and uploading it to YouTube if people are interested in seeing it. I'll put out the effort to start recording that. So let me know in the comments if you're interested, and I'll start recording the restorations I do. Anyways, I appreciate you watching this, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.